The barn smelled like old hay and shame. Elias Crane stood at the back of the crowd, hat pulled low, dust on his boots from 3 days' ride. He'd come to Coldwater Creek looking for work, ranch hand labor, maybe stable repair. Not this. Not an auction. Not this kind of auction. The auctioneer stood on a crooked platform built from shipping crates, his voice loud and sharp like a carnival barker selling broken dreams. Behind him, a line of people stood chained at the wrists, men, women, one boy who couldn't have been older than 12. Their eyes were hollow, their clothes torn, some stared at the dirt, others stared at nothing. Going once, the auctioneer shouted, slapping his hand on the podium. 17 years old, strong back, no family, no ties, clean bill from the dock, going twice. Elias felt his stomach turn. 4 years. It had been 4 years since the war ended. 4 years since the Emancipation Proclamation was supposed to mean something. But out here in the scorched edges of the frontier, in hidden barns like this one, the law was a ghost. And ghosts didn't stop men with money and hunger. The girl on the platform didn't move. She stood with her wrists bound in front of her, rope cutting into her skin. Her dress was once white, now it was torn at the shoulder, stained with dust and sweat. Her dark hair hung loose around her face, tangled and wild. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at anyone. But Elias saw her lips moving. "Don't look there," she whispered, not loud, not to anyone in particular, just a quiet, broken plea to the universe. "Please don't look there." Her voice cracked, and Elias felt something crack inside him too. The auctioneer grinned. "Do I hear 50? $50 for a strong girl, good hands, won't give you trouble, 50. A man in the front row raised his hand. Fat fingers, greasy coat. Elias didn't recognize him, but he recognized the type. The kind of man who didn't buy labor, he bought control. 50, the auctioneer barked. "Going once at 50, do I hear 60? Elias' hand twitched at his side. He shouldn't be here, he should walk out, ride back to wherever he came from. This wasn't his fight, this wasn't his. Then the girl's head lifted. Just slightly. Just enough for Elias to see her face clearly for the first time. And his heart stopped. The scar. A thin, jagged line that ran from her left eyebrow to her temple, faded now, but unmistakable. He'd seen it before. 8 years ago. In a burned-out cabin on the edge of a battlefield. He'd been 17, a Union soldier barely old enough to shave, stumbling through the wreckage of a farmhouse that had been caught in the crossfire. The family inside hadn't made it, except for one. A little girl, 9 years old, bleeding from a gash on her forehead where falling timber had struck her. She'd been clutching a doll made of corn husks, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Elias had wrapped her wound with a strip of his own shirt. He'd given her water from his canteen. He'd promised her he'd find help. And then his unit had moved out. He never saw her again. He told himself she made it, that someone found her, that she grew up safe somewhere far from the war. But here she was, bound, broken, being sold like livestock. And he'd done nothing. 60, another voice shouted from the crowd. The auctioneer's grin widened. 60, going once at 60. Elias' throat tightened, his pulse hammered in his ears. He looked at the girl again. She was staring at the dirt now, her lips still moving in that same quiet, desperate mantra. "Don't look there, don't look there, don't look there." She didn't recognize him. Why would she? He'd been just another soldier in blue, just another face in the chaos. But he recognized her. And that changed everything. "Going twice at 60, the auctioneer shouted. Elias stepped forward. 80, he said. His voice came out rough, loud enough to cut through the noise. The crowd turned. The auctioneer blinked. 80, you bidding, cowboy. Elias didn't look at him, he looked at the girl. Her head lifted, slowly, her eyes found his. They were dark, empty, exhausted. And for just a moment, something flickered in them, not recognition, not hope. Just confusion. 80, Elias repeated. The fat man in the front row scowled. 90. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed. 90, do I hear? 100, Elias said flatly. The crowd murmured. The fat man cursed under his breath and waved his hand dismissively, sinking back into his seat. The auctioneer hesitated, scanning the room. No one else spoke. He slammed his hand on the podium. Sold, $100 to the man in the back. Elias felt the weight of every eye in that barn on him. He walked forward, boots echoing on the dirt floor. He pulled a roll of bills from his coat pocket, everything he had left from his last job, and handed it to the auctioneer without a word. The man counted it slowly, grinning, pleasure doing business. Elias Ein awed him. He turned to the girl. She was staring at him now, not with relief, not with gratitude. With fear. Come on, Elias said quietly. She didn't move. He stepped closer, reaching for the rope binding her wrists. Don't touch me, she whispered. Her voice was raw, broken. Elias froze. I'm not going to hurt you, he said. That's what they all say. He met her eyes, held them. I know, he said softly, but I mean it. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, she held out her wrists. Elias untied the rope. Her skin was raw beneath it, red and swollen. She pulled her hands back quickly, rubbing her wrists, eyes still locked on him like he might change his mind any second. What's your name? He asked. She didn't answer. He nodded. All right, we're leaving. He turned toward the barn door. She didn't follow. He looked back. She was standing there, trembling, arms wrapped around herself. You paid for me, she said quietly. Now do it. Elias frowned. Do what? Whatever you bought me for. The words hit him like a fist to the chest. He shook his head. I didn't buy you to own you. Her expression didn't change. Everybody says that. Elias swallowed hard. He didn't have an answer for that, not one that would matter. So he just said, come on, let's get out of here. And this time, after a long, agonizing pause, she followed. Behind them, the auctioneer called for the next lot. And the barn filled with voices again. But Elias didn't look back. They rode in silence. Elias had bought a horse and saddle from a stable on the edge of town, another chunk of his dwindling funds. The girl sat behind him, stiff and tense, her hands barely touching his coat. She didn't speak, didn't ask where they were going. She just stared at the horizon, like she was waiting for it all to fall apart. Elias didn't blame her. They rode until the sun began to sink, painting the sky in shades of copper and ash. He steered them toward a grove of cottonwoods near a shallow creek, shelter, water, and enough distance from Coldwater Creek to breathe. He dismounted first, then offered his hand. She ignored it and slid off the horse herself, nearly stumbling as her feet hit the ground. She caught herself against the saddle, then stepped back quickly, putting space between them. Elias tied the horse to a low branch and started gathering dry wood for a fire. The girl stood at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, watching him like a cornered animal. You can sit, Elias said quietly, nodding toward a flat rock near the fire pit he was building. She didn't move. He struck a match and lit the kindling. The flames caught slowly, crackling to life in the dimming light. I've got jerky and hardtack, he said. Not much, but it's something. Still nothing. Elias sat down on the opposite side of the fire, giving her space. He pulled a piece of dried meat from his pack and held it out across the flames. She stared at it. You need to eat, he said. Why do you care? Her voice was sharper now, defensive. Elias set the jerky on a clean cloth and placed it between them, because you look like you haven't eaten in days. So, he looked at her, really looked at her, the hollow cheeks, the bruised circles under her eyes, the way her hands shook even though she was trying to hide it. "So I care," he said simply. She laughed. It was bitter and broken. "You paid $100 for me. You don't get to pretend you're noble." Elias didn't flinch. "I'm not pretending." "Then what are you doing?" "Trying to help." "Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do." She shook her head slowly, eyes blazing. "You think that makes it better? You think buying someone and then saying you won't hurt them makes you a good man?" Elias exhaled slowly. "No, I don't." That seemed to catch her off guard. She frowned. "Then why?" "Because 8 years ago," Elias said quietly, "I wrapped that scar on your head with a piece of my own shirt." The words hung in the air. The girl froze. Her hand moved instinctively to her temple, fingers brushing the faded scar. "What?" she whispered. Elias met her eyes across the fire. "The farmhouse, outside Shiloh, April of '62, you were 9, your family didn't make it, you were the only one left." Her face drained of color. "I was with the Union unit that passed through," Elias continued. "You were bleeding, I stopped to help, I gave you water, I wrapped your wound, and then my unit moved out and he swallowed hard. I left you there." She stared at him, breathing hard, eyes wide with something between disbelief and fury. "You," her voice cracked, "you left me." "Yes." "You left me alone." "Yes." "They burned everything," she said, her voice shaking now. "The soldiers came back that night. They burned what was left. I hid in the root cellar for 2 days before anyone found me." Elias felt his chest tighten. "I didn't know, I thought." "You thought what?" she snapped. "That someone would save me, that I'd be fine." "I was eventing," Elias said quietly. "I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I told my officers, they'd send help. But we were already moving. And the war," he trailed off. "It doesn't matter. I should have done more." She laughed again, but this time it was hollow. "You should have done anything." Elias nodded. "You're right." Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. The creek whispered in the background. Finally, she spoke. "What's your name?" "Elias." "Elias," she repeated, like she was testing it. "I'm Lena." He nodded. "Lena." She sat down then, slowly, carefully, on the rock he'd pointed to earlier. She picked up the jerky and tore off a small piece, chewing it slowly. "I don't forgive you," she said after a moment. "I don't expect you to. And I don't trust you. I wouldn't either." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time since the barn, the anger in her eyes faltered. "Not gone, just cracked." "Then why did you buy me?" she asked. Elias stared into the fire. "Because I've spent 8 years wondering if you were still alive, and when I saw you on that platform," he exhaled slowly, "I couldn't walk away again." Lena said nothing, but she didn't leave either. She sat there, eating slowly, the firelight dancing across her scarred face. And Elias sat across from her, carrying the weight of a promise he'd broken and a debt he could never repay. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the night settled in around them like a held breath. They heard the horses just after dawn. Elias was already awake, crouched by the dying embers of the fire, feeding it fresh kindling. Lena was still asleep on the other side of the clearing, wrapped in the blanket he'd given her. She'd barely spoken after their conversation the night before, just ate in silence, then curled up as far from him as the camp allowed. He didn't push. But now the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the trees, low and rhythmic, growing louder. Elias stood slowly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Lena," he said quietly. She stirred, then sat up fast, eyes wide and alert. She'd learned to wake like that, ready to run. "Someone's coming," Elias said. She was on her feet in seconds, blanket falling away. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. Her face went pale. "They're coming for me." Elias shook his head. "You don't know that." Yes, I do. Before he could respond, the riders broke through the tree line. 4 men. The one in front wore a star pinned to his chest, a sheriff's badge, tarnished and crooked. His face was weathered, his eyes cold. The men flanking him were hired muscle, the kind you found in every frontier town where law was more suggestion than rule. The sheriff reined his horse to a stop 10 feet from the camp. His gaze swept over Elias, then landed on Lena. He smiled. Well, well, he said, looks like we found her. Elias stepped between them. Can I help you, Sheriff? The man's smile didn't waver. Name's Dalton, Sheriff of Coldwater Creek, and you, friend, are in possession of stolen property. Elias' jaw tightened. I bought her, legal and square. Dalton chuckled. See, that's where you're wrong. That auction wasn't sanctioned, wasn't legal, just a bunch of vultures picking over scraps. He leaned forward in his saddle. Which means that girl belongs to the state, and the state says she comes with me. Belongs to the state, Elias repeated slowly. What does that mean? Means she's a ward, no family, no guardian. She goes to a work camp until she's claimed or placed. Work camp, Elias said flatly. You mean another auction? Dalton shrugged. Call it what you want. Point is, she's coming with me. Lena's voice came from behind Elias, quiet but sharp. I know you. Dalton's smile faded. You were there, Lena said, stepping forward. At my family's farm 8 years ago. Elias glanced back at her. Her hands were clenched into fists. Her eyes were blazing. You led the soldiers, she continued. You told them my father was hiding Confederate supplies. You told them to burn it. Dalton's expression hardened. A lot of farms burned during the war, girl. Don't go putting that on me. You called them traitors, Lena said, her voice shaking now. You called my family traitors so you could take their land. One of the men behind Dalton shifted uncomfortably. Dalton's hand moved to his belt. Careful, girl, you're talking about a lawman. You're not a lawman, Lena spat. You're a thief. Elias raised a hand slowly. Easy. But Lena wasn't done. He didn't just burn the farm. He took the deed. He sold the land to a rail company for twice what it was worth. She looked at Elias, eyes fierce. That's why he wants me back, because I'm the only one left who knows the truth. Dalton's jaw tightened. That's a hell of an accusation. It's the truth. Your truth, Dalton said coldly. Word of a homeless girl against a sheriff. Who do you think people will believe? Elias felt the weight of his revolver at his side. He didn't draw it, not yet. She's not going with you, he said. Dalton's eyes narrowed. You really want to die for this? I don't want to die at all, Elias said evenly, but I'm not letting you take her. One of Dalton's men drew his gun. Elias' hand moved to his revolver. Time slowed. The air thickened with tension, dust swirling in the early morning light. And then, another sound. More hoofbeats. Dalton turned, frowning. 5 riders emerged from the opposite tree line, older men, weathered and rough, rifles slung across their saddles. Elias recognized one of them, Tom Brennan, a ranch hand he'd worked beside 2 years ago on a cattle drive. Tom reined his horse to a stop and nodded at Elias. Morning, Eli. Elias exhaled slowly. Tom. Heard there was trouble out here, Tom said, his eyes shifting to Dalton. Thought we'd ride out, make sure everything's square. Dalton's face reddened. This is official business, Brennan. Official business with 4 guns aimed at one man and a girl, Tom said mildly. Doesn't look official to me. One of the other riders, a gray-haired man named Cole, spat into the dirt. Dalton, I branded calves with you 20 years ago. Don't make me shoot a man I once called friend. Dalton stared at them, his hand still on his gun. Then slowly, he lowered it. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yeah, Tom said, it is. Dalton jerked his reins and turned his horse. His men followed. They rode back into the trees, without another word. The clearing fell silent. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Tom dismounted and walked over, clapping Elias on the shoulder. "You all right?" "Yeah," Elias said, "thanks." Tom glanced at Lena. "She the one?" Elias nodded. Tom tipped his hat. "Ma'am." Lena didn't respond. She just stared at the trees where Dalton had disappeared, her hands still trembling. "He'll come back," she said quietly. Tom shook his head. "Not with us here, and not with folks knowing what he did." He looked at Elias. "Word spreads fast. People remember the farms that burned. They remember the families that got called traitors just so men like Dalton could steal land." Elias looked at Lena. "It's over." She met his eyes. And for the first time, he saw something other than fear. Not trust. Not yet. But hope. They stayed near the creek for 3 more days. Tom and his men rode back to their ranches, but they left supplies, blankets, food, a spare tent. "In case you need time to figure things out," Tom had said before he left. Elias was grateful. Lena didn't say much. She spent most of the first day sitting by the water, staring at nothing. Elias didn't push her. He chopped wood, mended the tent, caught fish from the creek. Small things, quiet things. On the second day, she spoke. "Why didn't you leave?" she asked. Elias was sharpening his knife by the fire. He looked up. "What?" "When Dalton came," Lena said, "you could have handed me over, saved yourself." Elias set the knife down. "No, I couldn't." "Why not?" He hesitated. "Because I already left you once." Lena looked away. Silence settled between them again, but it felt different now. Less like a wall, more like a pause. On the third day, Lena helped him cook. She didn't say anything, just knelt beside the fire and started slicing potatoes while Elias prepared the fish. They worked side by side in silence, the rhythm of it strangely comfortable. When the food was ready, they ate together. "I don't remember you," Lena said suddenly. Elias nodded. "I figured." "But I remember the shirt," she said, "the piece you tore off. It had a button on it, blue thread." Elias paused. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small tin. Inside was a single button, blue thread still attached. He held it out. Lena stared at it. "I kept it," Elias said quietly. "I don't know why, just did." Lena took the button, turning it over in her fingers. Her eyes glistened. "I thought everyone forgot," she whispered. "I didn't," Elias said. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "Thank you," she said. It was the first time she'd said it. Elias nodded. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes," she said, "I do." They sat there as the sun dipped lower, the sky turning gold and violet. "What happens now?" Lena asked. Elias exhaled slowly. "I don't know. I can take you wherever you want to go, find you work, a place to stay. And then you're free." Lena was quiet for a long moment. "What if I don't know where to go?" Elias met her eyes. "Then we figure it out together." She smiled then, small, fragile, but real. "All right," she said. And for the first time in 8 years, Elias felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd done something right. "So let me ask you, if you were Elias, would you have stepped forward in that barn? Would you have risked everything for a stranger or for the ghost of a promise you made years ago?" Take a deep breath, pour yourself a cup of tea, and think about that. If you're still with me, tap subscribe so you don't miss how this story ends. Tell me what time it is for you right now and where you're listening from. Because what comes next changes everything. 2 weeks later, Elias and Lena rode into the town of Grey Ridge. It was small, barely more than a crossroads with a general store, a blacksmith, and a church with a crooked steeple. But it was far from Coldwater Creek, far from Dalton, far from the barn. Elias had heard about a ranch nearby that needed hands. The owner was an older man named Hank Whitmore, a former Union officer who ran his operation fair and clean. Elias figured it was worth a try. They found Whitmore outside the barn, mending a fence. He looked up as they approached, squinting in the sunlight. "Help you?" "Looking for work," Elias said. "Heard you might be hiring." Whitmore studied him for a moment, then glanced at Lena. "Both of you." "If you've got it," Elias said. Whitmore set down his hammer. "I don't ask questions, but I expect honest work, fair pay, roof over your head." "That's all we're asking for," Elias said. Whitmore nodded. "All right, we'll try it." They started the next day. Elias worked the horses, mended fences, hauled supplies. Lena helped in the house, cooking, mending clothes, tending the garden. Whitmore's wife, Clara, was kind and quiet, never prying, never judging. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Lena began to smile more. She laughed once when one of the ranch dogs stole a biscuit from the table. She hummed while she worked in the garden. And slowly, the fear in her eyes faded. One evening, Elias was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, when Lena came and sat beside him. "I've been thinking," she said. "Yes." "About what you said, about figuring things out together." Elias looked at her. "I think I want to stay here," she said, "if that's all right." Elias smiled. "Yeah, that's all right." She nodded, then hesitated, and Elias. "Yes. Thank you for not leaving me again." Elias felt his throat tighten. He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded. They sat there in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. And for the first time in 8 years, Elias felt like he could finally breathe. 3 months later, word reached Gray Ridge that Sheriff Dalton had been arrested. Turned out Lena wasn't the only one who knew the truth. Other families, other survivors had come forward. Land deeds were investigated. Witnesses testified. Dalton was stripped of his badge and sent to territorial prison. Justice, it seemed, had a long memory. When Elias told Lena, she didn't cry, she didn't cheer. She just nodded quietly and said, "Good." And that was enough. Years later, when people asked Lena about her past, she didn't talk about the auction. She didn't talk about the barn or the chains or the fear. She talked about a man who stepped forward when no one else did. A man who kept a button in his pocket for 8 years, just in case. A man who didn't walk away. And when Elias grew old, his hair gray, his hands weathered, he kept that button on the mantle of the small house he and Lena built together on the edge of Whitmore's land. A reminder, not of what he'd lost, but of what he'd found. The sun dipped lower over Gray Ridge, dust rose around the ranch, horses whinnied in the distance. And somewhere in the quiet, a promise kept echoed louder than any words ever could.